our country's 250th birthday.
We will be celebrating the nation's 250th birthday and
250th anniversary of the independence of the United States of America.
United States 250th anniversary.
250 years of American independence.
Since 250th birthday next year.
Through our Story and American History podcast, it's completed its first week. We cover all 250 years at 250 years of USA on X. Very cool.
And that is the 250 celebration is about. It's not just a celebration of a country. It is a celebration of a people and of our story and what we have done together for 250 years.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. This daily history show goes year by year, recounting all 250 years of American history, and today is a little extra special as it is our 50th episode, and we're ending this week with an absolutely packed show. We'll, of course, be following up with the story of the presidential election that we began in yesterday's episode. We'll tell a few stories of intrigue in the West and say goodbye to one of the heroes of the Revolution, Lafayette. This is 1825 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America. And that means it's the last of James Monroe's annual White House receptions. There's a relatively famous quote from this day in which a woman from Virginia meets the president and shakes his hand and recounts the meeting as saying, "He is tall and well-formed, his dress plain and in the old style. His manner was quiet and dignified. From the frank, honest expression of his eye, I think he well deserves the encomium passed upon him by the great Jefferson, who said, 'Monroe was so honest that if you turned his soul inside out, there would be not a spot on it.'" Now, on the 3rd of January, we get to this year's first story, as a Scottish factory owner named Robert Owen buys 30,000 acres in Indiana from the German Rappites. Formerly, this area was known as Harmony, but Owen soon renames this planned socialist community New Harmony. His idea revolves around free education and egalitarianism, and he soon begins recruiting soldiers to join the community. From Britannica, about 1,000 settlers respond to Owen's public appeal, but most are misfits who eat his rations, argue over government, and are unable to perform the menial tasks vital to such a community. Farms and workshops lay idle, while virtual anarchy reigns. In just 2 years, Owen abandons the venture and sails back to Europe. On January 19th, Ezra Daggett and his nephew, Thomas Kinsent, patent food storage in tin cans, securing the right to protect their canning process from unauthorized use or copying for 14 years. Daggett and Kinsent had moved their canning business to New York City and opened a can shop near the docks about 3 years ago, and have been buying tin and other supplies through New York merchants who sell their finished product to Navy ships and captains. In early review, if you can call this endorsement, that comes from Captain James Rogers of the ship Columbia, who writes, This is to certify that I took on board the packet ship Columbia 2 cases of fresh beef and 1 case of chickens, prepared by Daggett and Kinsent. They remained on board during our voyage to Liverpool and back again to New York. They were then opened in the presence of Captain Brown and other gentlemen at the Fulton Street house, and found to be fresh and good. And we have so favorable an opinion of fresh provisions put up as above, that we shall hereafter take them on board our ships. We ate of the chicken and beef taken to Liverpool and back to New York, and found them as sweet as any provisions we ate. On the 27th, the United States President James Monroe urges Congress to approve creation of Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River for the relocation of Eastern Indian tribes to promote their welfare and happiness. Let's hear what he has to say right now. To the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States. Being deeply impressed with the opinion that the removal of the Indian tribes from the lands which they now occupy within the limits of the several states and territories to the country lying westward and northward thereof, within our acknowledged boundaries, is of very high importance to our Union, and may be accomplished on conditions and in a manner to promote the interest and happiness of those tribes. The attention of the government has been long drawn with great solicitude to the object. For the removal of the tribes within the limits of the state of Georgia, the motive has been peculiarly strong, arising from the compact with the state whereby the United States are bound to extinguish the Indian title to the lands within it whenever it may be done peaceably and on reasonable conditions. In the fulfillment of this compact, I have thought that the United States should act with a generous spirit, that they should omit nothing which should comport with a liberal construction of the instrument, and likewise be in accordance with the just rights of those tribes. From the view which I have taken of the subject, I am satisfied that in the discharge of these important duties in regard to both the parties alluded to, the United States will have to encounter no conflicting interests with either. On the contrary, that the removal of the tribes from the territory which they now inhabit to that which was designated in the message at the commencement of the session, which would accomplish this object for Georgia under a well-digested plan for their government and civilization, which should be agreeable to themselves, would not only shield them from impending ruin, but promote their welfare and happiness. Experience has clearly demonstrated that in their present state it is impossible to incorporate them in such masses in any form whatever into our system. It has also demonstrated with equal certainty that without a timely anticipation of and provision against the dangers to which they are exposed, under causes which it will be difficult if not impossible to control, their degradation and extermination will be inevitable. The great object to be accomplished is the removal of these tribes to the territory designated on conditions which shall be satisfactory to themselves and honorable to the United States. This can be done only by conveying to each tribe a good title to an adequate portion of land to which it may consent to remove, and by providing for it there a system of internal government which shall protect their property from invasion, and by the regular progress of improvement and civilization, prevent that degeneracy which has generally marked the transition from the one to the other state. I transmit herewith a report from the Secretary of War, which presents the best estimate which can be formed from the documents in that department of the number of Indians within our several states and territories, and the amount of lands held by the several tribes within each, of the state of the country lying northward and westward thereof, within our acknowledged boundaries, of the parts to which the Indian title has already been extinguished, and of the conditions on which other parts, in an amount which may be adequate to the object contemplated, may be obtained. By this report, it appears that the Indian title has already been extinguished to extensive tracts in that quarter, and that other portions may be acquired to the extent desired on very moderate conditions. Satisfied I also am that the removal proposed is not only practicable, but that the advantages attending it to the Indians may be made so apparent to them that all the tribes, even those most opposed, may be induced to accede to it at no very distant day. The digest of such a government with the consent of the Indians, which should be endowed with sufficient power to meet all the objects contemplated, to connect the several tribes together in a bond of amity and preserve order in each, to prevent intrusions on their property, to teach them by regular instruction the arts of civilized life and make them a civilized people, is an object of very high importance. It is the powerful consideration which we have to offer these tribes as an inducement to relinquish the lands on which they now reside and to remove to those which are designated. It is not doubted that this arrangement will present considerations of sufficient force to surmount all their prejudice in favor of the soil of their nativity, however strong they may be. Their elders have sufficient intelligence to discern the certain progress of events in the present train, and sufficient virtue, by yielding to momentary sacrifices, to protect their families and posterity from inevitable destruction. They will also perceive that they may thus attain an elevation to which, as communities, they could not otherwise aspire. To the United States, the proposed arrangement offers many important advantages in addition to those which have been already enumerated. By the establishment of such government over these tribes with their consent, we become in reality their benefactors. The relation of conflicting interests which has heretofore existed between them and our frontier settlements will cease. There will be no more wars between them and the United States. Adopting such a government, their movement will be in harmony with us, and its good effect be felt throughout the whole extent of our territory to the Pacific. It may fairly be presumed that, through the agency of such a government, the condition of all the tribes inhabiting that vast region may be essentially improved, that permanent peace may be preserved with them, and our commerce be much extended. With a view to this important object, I recommend it to Congress to adopt, by solemn declaration, certain fundamental principles in accord with those above suggested as the basis of such arrangements as may be entered into with the several tribes, to the strict observance of which the faith of the nation shall be pledged. I recommend it also to Congress to provide by law for the appointment of a suitable number of commissioners who shall, under the direction of the President, be authorized to visit and explain to the several tribes the objects of the government, and to make with them, according to their instructions, such arrangements as shall be best calculated to carry those objects into effect. A negotiation is now depending with the Creek Nation for the cession of lands held by it within the limits of Georgia, and with a reasonable prospect of success. It is presumed, however, that the result will not be known during the present session of Congress. To give effect to this negotiation and to the negotiations which it is proposed to hold with all the other tribes within the limits of the several states and territories, on the principles and for the purposes stated, it is recommended that an adequate approbation be now made by Congress. Okay, so while the plan is laid out quite logically here, implementation of this plan sees certain hurdles that we'll cover soon, and ties into next Friday's episode pretty directly. For now, though, there's a more pressing concern, as no presidential candidate received a majority of Electoral College votes, and the United States House of Representatives must now resolve this contingent election. You'll remember from the last time that this happened the days-long back and forth and deadlock, leading to dozens of ballots being taken. But now, with Henry Clay from Kentucky, who only recently was in the race himself, serving as the speaker, each state gets a vote, and the very first ballot secures for John Quincy Adams the simple majority needed to win the election. 13 states go for Adams, 7 for Jackson, and 4 for Crawford. Very soon after this, Adams sets about forming his cabinet, and Henry Clay is tapped to be the Secretary of State, as his views align closely with those of Adams. It's an immediate point of contention for the plurality of the American people and the Electoral College appointees that cast their votes for Andrew Jackson, and a move that's seen as a plot to secure for Clay a presidential future, as the Secretary of State historically goes on to fill the role after successful presidencies. As soon as he hears about the supposed means by which the election of Adams takes place, that being the alleged quid pro quo for the office of Secretary of State for Clay in exchange for securing the win for Adams, Andrew Jackson can barely contain his fury at having lost the election in what he sees as open defiance of the will of the people. I'll be going through a number of quotes I pulled from various letters sent in the period immediately following the decision in the House, and there's a nuance here that I think is pretty important. Jackson is not angered by the loss outright. He's angered at the dodgy way in which he lost, and sees it as a misrepresentation of the will of the public. Let's start with the earliest recorded letter I could find where Jackson expresses discontent, which comes the day after the vote is cast in the House, and where, on February 10th, Jackson writes to John Overton, saying, "The election is over, and Mr. Adams prevailed on the first ballot. Mr. Clay had influence enough to barter the votes of Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, Louisiana, which drew after it Ohio. These, with Maryland giving way, decided the vote. Thus you see here, the voice of the people of the West have been disregarded, and demagogues barter them as sheep in the shambles, for their own views and personal aggrandizement." On February 14th, Jackson writes to his friend William Berkeley Lewis and says, "I am informed this day by Colonel Richard Johnston of the Senate that Mr. Clay has been offered the House of Secretary of State, and that he will accept it. Mr. Clay told Colonel J the above. So you see, the Judas of the West has closed the contract and will receive the 30 pieces of silver. His end will be the same. Was there ever witnessed such a bare-faced corruption in any country before? The Senate, if this nomination is sent to it, will do its duty. No imputation will be left at its door." Jackson writes to John Coffey on the 19th of February and says, "I weep for the liberty of my country when I see at this early day of its successful experiment that corruption has been imputed to many members of the House of Representatives, and the rights of the people have been bartered for promises of office. He writes again to Lewis on the 20th of February and says, "You know my inmost feelings upon the subject of the presidential election. I can reiterate with truth that if it had not been for the means used, I would be happy at the result, as it gives me the liberty, when I choose, to retire once more to my peaceful dwelling. But when I reflect that the result has been brought about by the offer to Mr. Clay of the Secretary of State's office and his influence with other members, I look forward and shudder for the liberty of my country. If at this early period of the experiment of our republic, men are found base and corrupt enough to barter the rights of the people for proffered office, what may we not expect from the spread of this corruption hereafter?" In a postscript of interest, Jackson adds, "P.S. On the result of the election, a number of my friends requested that I should not answer that I would or would not suffer my name again to be run as president. I have now no doubt, but I have had opposed to me all the influence of the cabinet except Calhoun. There is more corruption here than I anticipated, and, as you know, I thought there was enough of it." He writes to Colonel George Wilson the same day and says, "Mr. Clay, it is said, has been offered the office of Secretary of State, and it is also said he has agreed to accept it. This, to my mind, is the most open, daring corruption that has ever shown itself under our government, and if not checked by the people, will lead to open, direct bribery in less than 20 years. For what is this barter of office for votes but bribery? Mr. Clay is prostrate here in the minds of all honest and honorable men. What will be his fate in Kentucky I cannot say, but Mr. Bibb, who is here, says this act will prostrate him in Kentucky." Now, Jackson does provide some balance to this initial outrage in a letter on the 22nd, where he writes, "It will be ascertained that I did not solicit the office of president. It was the frank and flattering call of the freemen of this country, not mine, which placed my name before the nation. I became a soldier for the good of my country. Difficulties met me at every step. I thank God that it was my good fortune to surmount them. The war over and peace restored, I sought to retire again to my farm and to private life, where, but for the call made by my country to the Senate, I should contentedly have remained. I never yet have been a hanger-on upon office and power, or was willing to hold any post longer than I could be useful to my country, not myself, and I trust I never shall." Finally, I'll include this letter from Isaac Lewis Baker to Jackson, who writes on the 21st of March and gives us a bit of foreshadowing when he says, "To say I was not greatly mortified at the success of such a scandalous intrigue would be a gross sin against candor and truth. Yet, since I have been advised of the honest indignation which the scene has produced from the Hudson to Belize, and that you will be before the people again, I feel greatly consoled by the belief the people will now act in such a manner as to prevent any such shameful barter for the future, and you will live to show to Clay and Company that virtue and service can, must, and shall triumph over slang, wanging, and base intrigue. We have not yet heard who is to compose the Yankee cabinet, but if Clay goes into it, he and Mr. Adams will do well to perform all the good or evil in the next 4 years which they ever intend doing, as they will at the end of that period return to the dull pursuits of private life." Alright, controversy aside, John Quincy Adams and John C. Calhoun will be sworn in shortly on March 4th. But before we get to that, on the 12th of February, Chief William McIntosh, the half-Scottish, half-Creek leader of the Lower Creek Indians, along with 5 fellow Lower Creek chiefs and federal representatives, signed the Treaty of Indian Springs, which declares that 4,700,000 acres of land in Georgia is to be sold to the United States, and the Indians currently inhabiting the land will migrate west no later than the 1st of September 1826. Ominously, before the meeting, McIntosh was warned that he would face dire circumstances if he made a deal with the United States and proceeded without approval from the Upper Creeks. And we really won't have to wait long to see that threat actuated. Alright, now, while this isn't really an American story, on the 22nd of February, Russia and Britain established the Alaska-Canada boundary through the Treaty of St. Petersburg. It is to begin at the 54-degree, 40-minute north latitude just north of the mouth of the Portland Canal, follow the canal until it meets 56 degrees north latitude, then follow the mountain summits situated parallel to the coast as far as 141 degrees west longitude, then follow that meridian northward to the frozen ocean. If you can't really picture that in your mind, you're not alone, so there is a photo of what this land really entails on our X today at 250 years of USA. The boundary line along the mountain summits is never to be further inland than 10 marine leagues, and that specific provision will later prove to be quite contentious. As we get to March 4th, John Quincy Adams is sworn in as the 6th President of the United States, and John C. Calhoun is sworn in as the 7th Vice President. Before ever beginning this show, I picked up a book that compiled each inaugural address, and even without knowing the details of each treaty, war, and election, I found that reading through the 45 addresses contained in the book, you could really get a sense for our story, so I enjoy these addresses of national significance. I will admit, however, that they can in fact be quite wordy, and it's not necessarily the easiest to convert into our modern understanding in archaic and near-dead form of English oration. To cite a recent example, the opening line of Madison's second inaugural address is kind of funny to compare to how it may be phrased in modern parlance. He opened that speech by saying, "I shall not attempt to describe the grateful emotions which the new and very distinguished proof of the confidence of my fellow citizens, evinced by my re-election to this high trust, has excited in my bosom." Nowadays, we might just say that like, "I can't explain how much your vote to re-elect me as president warms my heart." So there's definitely been a language shift. So I've taken your feedback on board, dear listener, and have not included the entire address here, opting instead to include a few particularly relevant sections in which Adams addresses the state of the country and its growth, the recent party divisions, and makes an oath to uphold American principles. In the compass of 36 years since this great national covenant was instituted, a body of laws enacted under its authority and in conformity with its provisions has unfolded its powers and carried into practical operation its effective energies. Subordinate departments have distributed the executive functions in their various relations to foreign affairs, to the revenue and expenditures, and to the military force of the Union by land and sea. A coordinate department of the judiciary has expounded the Constitution and the laws, settling in harmonious coincidence with the legislative will numerous weighty questions of construction, which the imperfection of human language had rendered unavoidable. The year of Jubilee since the first formation of our Union has just elapsed, That of the declaration of our independence is at hand. The consummation of both was effected by this Constitution. Since that period, a population of 4 millions has multiplied to 12. A territory bounded by the Mississippi has been extended from sea to sea. New states have been admitted to the Union in numbers nearly equal to those of the First Confederation. Treaties of peace, amity, and commerce have been concluded with the principal dominions of the earth. The people of other nations, inhabitants of regions acquired not by conquest, but by compact, have been united with us in the participation of our rights and duties, of our burdens and blessings. The forest has fallen by the axe of our woodsmen. The soil has been made to teem by the tillage of our farmers. Our commerce has whitened every ocean. The dominion of man over physical nature has been extended by the invention of our artists. Liberty and law have marched hand in hand. All the purposes of human association have been accomplished as effectively as under any other government on the globe, and at a cost little exceeding in a whole generation the expenditure of other nations in a single year. The collisions of party spirit, which originate in speculative opinions or indifferent views of administrative policy, are in their nature transitory. Those which are founded on geographical divisions, adverse interests of soil, climate, and modes of domestic life are more permanent and therefore perhaps more dangerous. It is this which gives inestimable value to the character of our government, at once federal and national. It holds out to us a perpetual admonition to preserve alike, and with equal anxiety, the rights of each individual state in its own government, and the rights of the whole nation in that of the Union. Less possessed of your confidence in advance than any of my predecessors, I am deeply conscious of the prospect that I shall stand more and oftener in need of your indulgence. Intentions upright and pure, a heart devoted to the welfare of our country, and the unceasing application of all the faculties allotted to me to her service are all the pledges that I can give for the faithful performance of the arduous duties I am to undertake. To the guidance of the legislative councils, to the assistance of the executive and subordinate departments, to the friendly cooperation of the respective state governments, to the candid and liberal support of the people so far as it may be deserved by honest industry and zeal, I shall look for whatever success may attend my public service, and, knowing that, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain, with fervent supplications for his favor, to his overruling providence, I commit with humble but fearless confidence my own fate and the future destinies of my country. Now, I told you wouldn't have to wait long. On April 30th, Minowa in Upper Creek Chief arrives at McIntosh's home in Carroll County, Georgia, with 200 fellow Creek warriors. They set fire to his house, drag him out of the burning residence, stab him in the heart, and shoot him more than 50 times. I'm not entirely clear on the relationship this assassination has on the decision, but soon after the killing, Congress rejects the ratification of the treaty, claiming that many of the signatories are not authoritative Creek leaders, and there's compelling evidence of bribery. The inn where the treaty was signed actually stands to this day, and it's fascinating that McIntosh himself was one of the builders. Construction completed about 2 years before this grisly death. The hostility between the United States and the Irikara ends, at least officially, on the 18th of July, when the two opponents sign a peace treaty. We mentioned the start of conflict against the backdrop of the trapping party that Hugh Glass joined back in 1823, and it really hasn't escalated too much further. Peace is secured after the loss of about a dozen men from Ashley's company and 7 soldiers on the American side, and between 10 and 20 Arikara warriors, preventing any really large-scale engagement. In the story that contributes to today's cover, on October 26th, the Erie Canal officially opens, connecting Lake Erie to the Atlantic Ocean via the Hudson River. This is a huge moment. Workers broke ground on the canal on July 4th of 1817, and today, some 8 years later, the canal is officially open. The canal was a massive engineering challenge, one that's hard to fully grasp with knowledge now of today's construction methods. Workers have built this canal almost entirely by hand, as the steam shovel or even dynamite have not yet been dreamt up. 9,000 laborers used pickaxes and gunpowder to carve through the rock. On the fly, they devised tools such as the stump puller and a hydraulic cement that can harden underwater. The construction team includes engineers with experience of the most advanced canal systems in England and France, but even so, this was a project of an unprecedented scale. Lake Erie, the canal's western terminus, is more than 570 feet above sea level. The Hudson River at Waterford, New York, which is the eastern terminus, is a mere 16.5 feet in elevation above sea level. But it's not even a straight incline. There's rises and dips along the way. And the engineers knew the canal couldn't be a continuous river. It had to be a series of waterways, each occupying its own elevation, with those strips connected by locks. Now that it's completed, this canal runs 363 miles long, 40 feet wide, and usually 4 feet deep. All in all, it includes some 83 lift locks. Governor Clinton celebrates the opening of the canal aboard the Seneca Chief. He travels down the canal to the Hudson River, and from there travels to New York City, where in a ceremony he pours a bucket of water from Lake Erie into the New York harbor, joining the two in a wedding of the waters. This Erie Canal is set to become a swift economic success, and although it costs New York State about $7 million to build, tolls from the waterways will cover the costs of its construction within just 9 years. Commerce from the canal will also transform New York into the financial capital of the country. Until now, the ports of New Orleans, Philadelphia, and Baltimore have been rivals, but that's set to change. What were once sleepy villages and towns along this path of the canal will soon grow into vibrant cities and industrial centers, like Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and more, just to name a few. Alright, now, I look into a bunch of resources for this show to get a good variety of topics. It's always my goal not just to provide the year-by-year retelling that you would see if you were to Google what happens in 1825. I want to find the kind of niche stuff, I want to find the main stuff, the politics, the way things change, firsts, all that. That's how I came across this first, which I am about to explain. On the 29th of November, Rossini's comic opera, The Barber of Seville, becomes the first Italian opera performed in the United States, and is performed at New York's City Park Theater. I listened to a recording of some of this music when I was at work, and there was a particular track that I found vaguely familiar. And I later realized I had heard it from Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry or some cartoon like that. But listen in, and just remember that this song comes from the play that premieres 1825 in America.
vogliono, donne ragazzi, vecchie fanciulle, con la parrucca, presto la barba, con la sanguigna, presto il biglietto, tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi chiedono, con la parrucca, presto la barba, presto il biglietto. Figaro, 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 Figaro. Oimè, oimè, che folla, oimè, che furia, la volta, per carità, per carità, per carità. Uno alla volta, uno alla volta, uno alla volta, per carità. Figaro, son qua, ehi, Figaro, son qua, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro su, Figaro giù, Figaro su, Figaro giù. Fortissimo sono il fulmine, sono il fuoco della città, della città, della città, della città, della città.
Finally, you'll recall from yesterday's episode the arrival of Lafayette in New York City for his visit to the nation that he fought to secure the freedom of. The general's visit was initially intended as a 4-month tour, but has since stretched into a 13-month journey to all 24 states. He was received with great enthusiasm throughout the country as cities and towns honored this Revolutionary War hero with parades, monuments, songs, dances, and ceremonies. He's met with former presidents such as Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and John Adams. He even meets a future president, but we won't spoil that. He visits George Washington's tomb and is celebrated at the White House, where John Quincy Adams makes a farewell speech on the steps of the White House, and Lafayette, reportedly tearfully, takes a moment to respond, saying, "God bless you, sir, and all who surround us, and God bless the American people, each of their states, and the federal government. Accept this patriotic farewell of an overflowing heart. Such will be its last throb when it ceases to beat." On the 10th of December, Lafayette makes his final address as he enters the House of Representatives, accompanied by a committee of 24 representatives. The Register of Debates records the speaker's introduction, in which he says, "The House of Representatives of the United States, impelled alike by its own feelings and by those of the whole American people, could not have assigned to me a more gratifying duty than that of being its organ to present to you cordial congratulations upon the occasion of your recent arrival in the United States in compliance with the wishes of Congress, and to assure you of the very high satisfaction which your presence affords on this early theater of your glory and renown. Although but few of the members who compose this body shared with you in the war of our Revolution, all have a knowledge, from impartial history or from faithful tradition, of the perils, the sufferings, and the sacrifices which you voluntarily encountered, and the signal services in America and in Europe which you performed for an infant, a distant, and an alien people, and all feel and own the very great extent of the obligations under which you have placed our country." Lafayette then addresses the House, saying, "What better pledge can be given of a preserving national love of liberty, when those blessings are evidently the result of a virtuous resistance of oppression and institutions founded on the rights of man and the Republican principle of self-government. My obligations to the United States, sir, far exceed any merit I might claim. They date from the time when I have had the happiness to be adopted as a young soldier, a favored son of America. They have been continued to me during almost half a century of constant affection and confidence, And now, sir, thanks to your most gratifying invitation, I find myself greeted by a series of welcomes, 1 hour of which would more than compensate for the public exertions and sufferings of a whole life. The approbation of the American people and their representatives for my conduct during the vicissitudes of the European Revolution is the highest reward I could receive. Well may I stand firm and erect when in their names, and by you, Mr. Speaker, I am declared to have in every instance been faithful to those American principles of liberty, equality, and true social order, the devotion to which, as it has been from my earliest youth, so it shall continue to be to my latest breath. So that brings 1825 to a close as the nation says goodbye to Lafayette. Couple cool stories in there, and thank you again for all of the listeners that have been hanging out for 50 episodes. That really is a landmark to be proud of. This ends the week, but in the meantime, before we get to Monday's episode covering 1826, you can feel free to reach out to me on socials at 250 Years of USA or send me an email 250yearsofusa@gmail.com. If you want to see the show grow, share it with somebody that you know. Like it, comment, subscribe, whatever you can do on the platform that you're on. It really does mean a lot, and it costs you nothing at all. This really is just the beginning. We have another 200 episodes to go through, so many awesome stories to cover, inventions to talk about, American greatness is on the horizon. I love recording these episodes. It's the highlight of my day when I get to sit down, go back through some of these scripts that I've written about American history. Every now and then I'll record multiple episodes in a day, and it does have an effect on my voice. As you can tell, I'm losing my voice right now, having to project extra hard to get through that because I really have lost it at this point. It's all dry and scratchy. But that's not what it's about. It's about telling America's story, and that's what I'm here to do. That's what I really enjoy doing, and that's what we'll continue to do in another 200 episodes. Until next time, though, this has been Our Story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.